Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Whale Nerds podcast. This is episode 145, and my name is Katlyn, and I am back with my last Antarctica report. So this is finally, we're getting to the end of the Antarctic season. It was a long, long time down in the Southern Hemisphere this year for me. Before we get into that, I do want to take a moment and say thank you to all of you that support the podcast, coming out on trips, buying merch, checking out our social media, website, blog, anything like that. Listening to the podcast, sharing it with friends, rating or reviewing it somewhere that you listen to it. And then especially those of you that financially support us on patreon.com. If you want to keep up with what's going on with us, we're active on Instagram the most, but Facebook and Instagram at Whale Nerds. You can also check in on things on our website, thewhalenerds.com. And then if you want to watch video versions of our episodes, they are available on YouTube from episode 100 onwards. So before I get into how the last month of the season went, I realized that in episode 144, I forgot to talk about an encounter that we had with killer whales outside of Deception Island. I guess I just kind of like glossed over that whole thing. On our way down the Bransfield Strait, we were doing some surveys for orca, and we were looking for whales the whole time, and we had like the staff on Fram had seen killer whales outside of Deception Island and in the Bransfield Strait before. And so I don't know if we just like manifested it or what, because one of the guides was like, sometimes we see killer whales on this stretch. And I was like, okay, like we'll see what happens. And we saw humpback whales and I think maybe even sei whales or a minke whale. I didn't see them. The other observer on the other side of the ship saw them. And then when we got closer to Deception, more of the staff and more of the guests were outside to see us go through Neptune's bellows and just to enjoy the scenery as we got close to the island. And there were a few humpbacks around, but just a little bit ahead where the water was like really disturbed because of the current, there were killer whales. And so we were able to we saw them from so far off, and we had a little bit of time to like play with at getting in and out of the bellows and landing at Deception, that we took some time to stop and watch them. And it was the small type Bs, so the Gerlache killer whales. And they were hunting chinstrap penguins. So on the outside of Deception Island is huge chinstrap penguin colonies. So it is like a chinstrap penguin all you can eat buffet. But they were kind of broken into like three little subgroups, and they were all chasing their own penguins around, and some of them chased them close in towards the ship, and so people got really good looks at them. And I have a photo of one where like the chin strap is like on the beak essentially of the killer whale, just like resting on its snout. And so yeah, that was a really amazing sighting. It was a pretty good sized group of killer whales, like at least 12, but maybe 15. And so that was a nice encounter, and I forgot to talk about that during the previous episode. So after that trip in and out of Chile, I had a 2-week break, and I had all kinds of grand ideas of things I could do on my break, like travel to another country or like do some other things. And then I just knew if I tried to make another like trip out of something, that I was going to be really tired and it was going to be really hard to finish the season. So I just ended up entering Argentina early. I had a 2-week break in Ushuaia. And I spent a lot of time just like not doing anything. Which was good. I mean, I think I really needed it before the last push for the season. And I did do some touristy things. I mean, I walked around almost every day, at least to go out and get groceries, or if not to go for a hike or just like stretch my legs or whatever. I did go on a tour to go see penguins and to go down to Estancia Harborton, which is like southeast, mostly east of Ushuaia. And I think you could probably um rent a car and like do your own trip down there and just like arrange with the museum that you're coming. But there is a company in Ushuaia called Pira Tour, Pira, that does a trip there several days of the week. And so I booked a trip with them, and they take you by bus to this place, like Harborton Ranch is how you say it in English, Estancia Harborton. And there's a museum for marine mammals mostly. They have some like penguin stuff and a few other things. But it's that part of the Beagle Channel ends up getting quite a few strandings of marine mammals, like species that are not really well documented in South American waters, species that are not really documented elsewhere in Argentina. And so they have quite a collection of skeletons, especially beaked whales. Um, at the museum, and it's a research station, and it's also a place to prepare the bones, and it's an educational little museum. And then they also respond to all the strandings. As far as I know, just dead animals. I don't think they deal with any live strandings, but I didn't actually ask them. The tour was pretty brief, and there was a lot of things to see, but it was really cool getting to see skulls of species that like you don't really see in museum collections very often. And seeing like fully articulated skeletons hung up on the walls with like the paintings of the real animal and like having all that size comparison stuff was really cool. Uh, then we also were able to take a tour of an island where there are Gentoo penguins and Magellanic penguins. And it was kind of nice to like be a tourist and not have to manage the guests around penguins, like so I could just go and photograph and do whatever I wanted. Um, it's a little late in the season by that point because it's like the last week of February, third week of February, something like that. Um, and so the Gentoos have pretty much all fledged their chicks. So like there's maybe a few adults hanging around, but I think it was mostly um birds that are getting ready to molt and then recently fledged chicks. And then the Magellanic penguins, many of them were hanging out at the beach, and so that was cool to see such a big number of them. And there were chicks, and they have a little bit different plumage that's more obvious between adult and chick that's about to fledge compared to other species of penguins. And there were lots of molting adults as well, so that was really nice to see. Pira Tour also is the only company that has permission to land on Isla Martillo. So, other companies will offer a trip by boat from Ushuaia, but they just like either put the bow of the boat on the beach so you can see the penguins close, or they just hover right offshore and you can't actually get off the boat and walk around. So only if you go with Pira Tour can you land on the island. And they're kind of like the stewards of the island. They have like a camera program. Um, they do kind of like survey and keep track of what's going on there. And sometimes they also do have king penguins that come to shore there, but there's no colony there. So that was some of what I did in Ushuaia. And then my last two trips of the season, it was about 3.5 weeks from beginning first week of March to the end of the month. And that was back with Oceanwide on a different vessel. So fourth vessel for the season is called Ortelius. And the first trip we did is what they call a base camp trip. So it's pretty similar to what we ran on Nansen when I was working for HX, where there's lots of off-ship activities. And with Oceanwide this trip, all the off-ship activities are included in the base camp. It's already factored into the price. So if people want to, they can go mountaineering, they can go kayaking, they can go camping, and it's up to the expedition team to like just put that whole puzzle together and try and figure it out. The base camp is getting phased out um, for this late in the season for a couple reasons, mostly because of conditions. So when we're running these trips in March, the snow conditions are pretty tough for mountaineering and for camping because there's not a lot of fresh powder snow. It's the fall during this time of year, and maybe you get lucky and you get some snow, and that makes conditions a little bit easier for working on the snow safely. Um, but you just really can't plan for it. And especially for mountaineering, there's a lot more crevasses that time of year. And you really have to get a lot more creative about where you can do your mountaineering activities because since it's open to everybody, you have to be able to accommodate people of any mountaineering level, which means quite a few people have never even walked on snow, never worn snowshoes, don't really understand how to make their own assessments for their abilities and for their safety. And so it does get a little bit more complicated. We got really lucky that we were able to pull off um, pretty much everything throughout the trip, but it definitely was required a lot of creative thinking on behalf of the guides and the expedition leader and assistant expedition leader. So we started off. Our first landing in Antarctica was at Orn Harbor, which, if you remember from previous episodes, I talked about how it's a really, really steep switchback spot. So the conditions were a little bit better because it had snowed since the last few times we'd been there. But the first like stretch of steps up to the first switchback was definitely really icy. We had to get the ice axes out and cut lines in the snow for people to use for traction, and we had to help a lot of people from the landing site. It was also full of humpback whales. So as we pulled in the morning, there were quite a few whales out in the Gerlache, which is to be expected. But then as we turned in to Orn Harbor, there was like 8 or 9 humpbacks in the harbor area itself. And so we got some really nice looks at whales. But then also we were kind of blocked like from the landing site. So like the staff got on shore, started setting up the route, flagged the switchbacks. And then the first Zodiacs are coming to shore with the I think with the mountaineering group because they're going to go ahead of everybody because they need the most time. And the whales were like blocking the path to the landing site. We're all standing there on the landing site, like taking cell phone videos of these humpbacks going right past us as the Zodiacs are sitting there waiting for them to clear out. And then the whole landing, you could see them from anywhere at the top, which was incredible. And at the top, there was still chinstrap penguins, and the snow was so colorful. So by that point in the season, the snow algae has been fertilized so much by the penguins being there that like most of the landing sites, unless there's been a recent snowfall, are like totally green or pink colored because of all this snow algae. So then in the afternoon, we went just around the corner to Cooverville Island. It's just on the other side, and down like maybe a mile from Orn Harbor. So we went to Cooverville Island, and there were quite a few whales on the way there. People were able to see them during our Zodiac cruises. And the landing at Cooverville was nice. I mean, the Gentoos were really spread out, so it was kind of tricky to like manage the landing, but we weren't there for a super long time. Because it's a small site and we can offer Zodiac cruising. But two, we were trying to get to a place where we could camp for the night. So base camp, you have to offer camping to people, so that severely affects your itinerary based on weather. And then like on Ortelius, like on base camp, you could have 100 people that want to go camping. And so you have to do it multiple nights. You can't have 100 people camping at a time. So then after we went to Cooverville, we just cruised down the Gerlache and tried to get down there as quickly as we could to go camping at Des Moines Point. Because that's like one of the only spots. One, because of the weather, but two, because like we're going to try and have 60 people camp the first night to try and take the pressure off of the trip. And so we had just loads of humpbacks all down the Gerlache the whole way there. It was just like every 2 minutes, another humpback whale, another humpback whale, another humpback whale. Of course, they were not very cooperative, so we didn't get a ton of fluke IDs, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. We did get some though, so that was good. And when we got to Des Moines, conditions were doable. It was really hard for them to dig out their like beds in the snow. But they did get a nice night for camping. It was clear sky. They actually got to see the stars. One of the guides set up a time lapse camera. There was a little bit of southern lights. Um, and so it was really, really good. And in the morning, they were all like zombies when we picked them up, and they and then when they came back out, and we did like a real landing at Des Moines Point. But it's okay. They managed. We had uh, plenty of Gentoo penguins. The chicks are starting to get really independent and running around and being really cute. There were some fur seals around, and again, the snow was super, super colorful, and it worked out just fine. The mountaineering group did a nice little snowshoe session there, and then in the afternoon we just went on the other side of Des Moines Point, which is where Port Lockroy is, which is like Goodyear Island and Jugula Point. And it's been closed all season, and the staff is gone at that point in the season, which that's fine. Like it's March, they got to get out of there. It freezes over around Port Lockroy pretty regularly. And so they do need to get out of there like by March, or they'll get stuck there. So we did a Zodiac cruise there. We had the best minke whale encounter of my whole season there. It wasn't like totally curious like those videos you see sometimes from Antarctica where they're like picking their head up and rolling around, but it definitely was like circling around the boats, and it was either happy to just feed right next to all of us, or it was like kind of zipping around between us all, and was very uh very easy to watch. Like you could actually follow it in the Zodiac for multiple surfacings, which was really nice. Um, we also had a leopard seal that was guarding a piece of ice. And that was a nice thing to be able to show guests. Check that off the list on the second day of the trip. There were fur seals on the islands. There was a more than one Weddell seal. And there was a southern elephant seal as well, hauled out near Port Lockroy. So really nice wildlife viewing. Really beautiful conditions as well. It was glassy, flat, calm. So it was really, really nice second day. So then the third day, we did our Lemaire crossing at first light in the morning to get a little bit further south and check that off the list for people. And it was one of the nicest, glassiest, gorgeous Lemaire crossings of the whole season. Nice pink morning light, and just really gorgeous in the channel. There were whales, at the beginning and the end of the channel. There was a leopard seal on ice at the end of the channel. And then we came around and into Port Charcot. Port Charcot itself, we did a landing there. There were whales between us and the landing site. And when we got to the landing site, there were lots of young Gentoo penguins. And so that was kind of a tricky thing to like sort out how we were gonna crowd manage them and crowd manage the guests. But it all kind of settled out and it worked out just fine. The snow at Port Charcot was horrendous. Absolutely horrible late season snow. Like couldn't really make a very big landing site because it was like everything was just holes, and it was like ice more than it was snow, and it was just really rough walking. There were all three species of brush-tail penguins there. So there were chinstrap penguins, Gentoo penguins, and Adelie penguins. So like at least we got that checked off the list. All three species were molting. But yeah, it was really not nice landing conditions. And then in the afternoon, we had an awesome cruise in the iceberg graveyard that piles up between Port Charcot and Plano Island. And like amazing numbers of leopard seals. I think double-digit numbers of leopard seals. There was one on ice right next to the ship. There were other ones scattered all around. We had also really some of the best crab eater seal viewing I've ever had. There were like four of them trying to get up on a ice floe. Some of them were already up there, and like these crab eater seals, I think were just like hamming it up. They would like jump up on the ice and get like more than half their body weight up there and then just fall off on purpose. And then they started like jumping and porpoising like a dolphin, like you see sea lions do, except for like they're true seals. So like their flippers are not that long and they're not that graceful, but like it was so funny to watch them. And it was like the most entertaining I think I've ever seen crab eater seals be. I mean, I haven't spent a ton of time with like multiple crab eater seals. I've seen like one hauled out on or hauled out on ice before, but yeah, that was really amazing to see. And then we had um a Weddell seal on ice. It was very skittish. And then another one we we kept going back behind by the Weddell seal, kind of cruising the islands and the ice, and we had two leopard seals hauled out on the ice together, two male ones, and so that was just really interesting, good seal action all afternoon. It was really nice. So then that evening, while it was dark, I think we did go back through the Lemaire. We didn't I don't know if it was during dinner or what, but we didn't get to be out on deck for it. Or maybe we went out and around. I don't really know. Um, and then the fourth day we were back north of the Lemaire. We landed at Danco Island in the morning. And Danco also did not have great snow. It was really slushy. The penguin highways were super deep and tough to cross. Like some of them were so deep you wouldn't be able to see the penguins walking in them anymore. They were just like such big trenches. But they were really cute Gentoo penguin chicks on the beach. They were being very nosy and like trying to get into our gear bags and stuff, which was pretty cute. And for the first time ever, I saw the ruins of what I think is Base O at Danco Island. It's just some couple cement foundations. I think they had a sign on them, but there were birds on the foundations, and so we couldn't walk up to them. But yeah, first time I've ever seen like the human artifacts at Danco Island because it's so late in the season. The snow was actually melted, so you could actually see it. We did offer the polar plunge for guests there. And almost every single person polar plunged. It was pretty insane. I think like, we had just over 100 people on board and like 90 something plunged. So yeah, pretty incredible. In the afternoon, we backtracked a little bit and went down to Paradise Harbor, which is not that far away from Danco. And we had intended to have some mountaineers go out there. We did kayaking, we did Zodiac cruising, and we were kind of hoping to camp there. But when we got there, just heavy, heavy, heavy snow started. So we had like when we first got there, dropped the Zodiacs and everything, it wasn't really snowing. But we couldn't see the tops of anything. And so we were like, we can't send mountaineers out in this. We like literally cannot see them. Which means they're not going to have good visibility where they're climbing. And like the risk of the conditions that time of year, you just really can't push it. But it was fine because we had a wonderful kayak and Zodiac cruise session. The sea was calm. And then it was just like big, wet. And then it was just like big, heavy, and wet snowflakes, like the type of snowflakes that just turn your whole outfit white. We had lots of whales, and we kind of just like stuck with a few whales that we were following around, and they took us to more whales. And at one point, we had two become a little bit curious about the zodiacs, and then all of a sudden, just engaged in this amazingly close, friendly, curious encounter with four of the zodiacs that were cruising for probably an hour, 45 minutes at least. And they were like touching the zodiacs and like blowing bubbles, and like it was really insane. Like they did that to every single zodiac. Like one whale in particular would like put its shoulder and its head like under your zodiac and like kind of like lean into you and just lay there for minutes at a time. It was like the best I can describe it is like you were being embraced by a whale. Like they didn't put their flipper around you and like hug you, but like they did that thing where they just like when a person like leans into you and like puts their head on your shoulder. That's kind of like what it felt like. And like they were looking at us and they were kind of checking out the whole zodiac and like looking at things underneath the zodiac. Um and it was so calm and it was heavy snow and like the snowflakes are just landing on their backs and it was amazing. Like probably one of the coolest encounters for me of the whole season. And yeah, just incredible. So I don't know how you top that really for people, but we we continue to have a pretty good trip. The next day the weather took a turn for the worse, which kind of complicated our plan. We had permission, which we were one of the few boats that had any like notion of permission this season to land at Palmer Station. They had done it on a previous trip that had divers, and the base commander had like worked it out for one more landing for us. But when we got there, the weather was just absolutely too rough. We tried every possible solution to get a landing off at Palmer Station. But we just really we couldn't make it work. So we backtracked again to come back towards Paradise. And on our way back up the Gerlash, we did end up finding killer whales, type B killer whales, which was good. It kind of like boosted morale for people after having the morning canceled. It was really windy, and the killer whales were really scattered out in a lot of big ice. So we couldn't really keep up with them too well. But we did end up getting pretty good looks at them and like made the most out of the encounter. And I didn't notice this until I looked at the photos later. But at one point they like fired up a minke whale for like 30 seconds and like got it to roll around a little bit and then it took off. And then we were going the opposite direction they were as that was happening. So we couldn't really like keep up and see what was going on. But also like I don't know if anyone else noticed besides me. Like I heard another guide say there was a whale close to the boat and they thought it was a minke whale, but there was also killer whales like going under the boat at the same time. So I maybe another guy did see it and I just brushed it off as like a miss ID. Um but yeah, it was interesting. I looked back through my photos and I was like, wow, there is a minke whale in here. So in the afternoon, we attempted a Zodiac cruise again in Paradise, and it was not anything like the day before. It didn't snow, but it was windy and bouncy, and I feel so bad. Like the guests just got so wet. I mean, I tried to minimize it as best I could all trip, but then like going back to the ship, I was like, you guys are gonna get soaked, and I'm so sorry. Like I'm gonna try everything I can to like keep you dry. But they had been so lucky with the weather all trip. I think they really did not understand like how to be properly dressed for the Zodiac. Like I had one person that was not in waterproofs, I had another person that came with no gloves. It's just like, oh my goodness. Like hopefully they like learned a lesson. Um, because that was definitely tough. In the evening, the wind did die down and the staff tried really hard to scout and find another place to camp. Stony Point ended up not being doable, but across Paradise on the other side, there was a lee from the one of the islands, and they found a camping spot with no wildlife that they could put 40 campers on. And so we did get the second night of camping in for everybody, and everybody that wanted to go camping was able to go camping, which was almost 100 people. So pretty amazing that we pulled that off with challenging conditions, especially just the fact that it's so late in the year. And then the next day, we woke up and picked up the campers, and it was absolutely stunning sunrise. Like one of the best, prettiest sky on fire sunrises of the whole season. And we saw lots of whales as we cruised up the Gerlache Strait going back towards Cooverville Island. We actually landed at the smaller islands further out in the Gerlache Strait called the Orne Islands. Um, so loads of whales, beautiful light, beautiful scenery. We got to the Orne Islands and the snow conditions were horrible. And it was a shame because it had snowed 2 days ago. So we were really expecting like conditions to be a little bit better so that we could walk around and get a good like stretch like at the penguin colonies. Because there's chinstrap penguins and Gen 2 penguins there. But yeah, there was several spots where like staff just had to stand there and help people walk around because it was so icy. Um, Everybody got around and got good looks, and you could actually see whales from the landing site. There were few fur seals around as well. And so it worked out fine. It was sunny morning. It was nice. But yeah, it was just a bummer because it had snowed like 2 days before really hard, and the conditions at Orne Islands was just not good. Um, and then in the afternoon, we worked our way north in the Gerlache Strait, and we went to a place called Foyne Harbor. Um, and there was just tons of humpbacks in the Gerlache again. And Foyne Harbor is like kind of on the outside, more towards the opening of the Gerlache Strait. And then like if you were to go deeper in there past like Enterprise Island and get into Nansen Island area, then you're down in Wilhelmina Bay, which had loads of whales in it this season. I mean, we had an absolutely epic day there on Nansen in January. And at Foyne Harbor, there's also a shipwreck of the whaling ship, the Governor. It's a Norwegian ship, so I think it's like spelled like the Governoren or something. But it's the shipwreck of the Governor. And the story of the ship, as far as we know, is that it was very full of oil. There was a party on board, and it got a little out of hand, and someone knocked over a whale oil lamp, and they couldn't extinguish the fire. And so, in an effort to save the oil on board and the ship, the captain ran it aground, so that everything, all the oil was underwater, so it wouldn't catch on fire. Wasn't really that successful. The crew was stranded there on shore, which there's not really much of a shore there. um, for a couple days, and then they got picked up by another ship, I think in their company, like within their Norwegian company. But really glassy, calm, cool conditions, and so you could like sit on top, and the ship is big. Like it's like most of it's underwater. And so you could sit on top of the shipwreck in the Zodiac and like see it underneath you, which is really cool. And there's a few other things around that are historic points of interest. There's some water boats and like a Chilean shelter and some other things around. And lots of fur seals on shore. There was kind of a nice little spot where you could kind of just like let the Zodiac rest up against the rocks. And there was lots of fur seals kind of chasing each other around and being entertaining. And then we did find whales, which was really nice. We got to see some humpback whales. And so overall, really, really nice cruise. And then for our last day of the base camp trip, we went up to Deception Island and we did a whole day there. So in the morning, we went into the back, into Telephone, and we did a nice big hike and leg stretch there. And then in the afternoon, we went to Whalers Bay. Because it has been snowing in the Bransfield Strait, and in the South Shetland Islands, there was a really nice, very light dusting of snow on Deception, which basically just like highlighted every single groove in the volcanic ash and like was this amazing stripy contrast pattern. Oh, it was so pretty. It was like a black and white pencil drawing. It was so cool. Um, and so then when we hiked up around the rim of one of the calderas at Telephone, it was just like you did not feel like you were on planet Earth. Like I'm standing up there, like you can't tell me that we're fighting wars like when we live on the same planet as like things like this. Like how it's just one of those moments where you're like you're not on Earth. Like you have when you're in Antarctica, it's like you feel like you're on another planet often, and then you keep seeing things that remind you that you're on Earth, and you're like, how? And just that scenery and how beautiful and calm and like kind of like the air was still, so it was kind of warm. Um, I was just like, what do we even have to argue with each other about? Like, I was just like so zen standing up there that morning because it was so pretty. And then of course you get snapped back to reality. But it's just one of those moments where you're like, you can kind of lose the world for a few minutes. And then in the afternoon we had a nice landing at Whalers. There were so many fur seals. It's starting to be that time of year where the fur seals come down into the peninsula. It's a lot of it is the very annoying ornery teenager ones, which are like the worst to deal with because they didn't succeed at breeding season, so they still need someone to like work off their testosterone with. But everybody did pretty good. No one really had too bad of a time. And we did do a Zodiac cruise through Neptune's bellows and back for guests. We kind of like split the landing a little bit. And so uh conditions were good enough to go out of the bellows. It was bouncy and choppy for sure. Go over to Neptune's window, come back around back through the bellows, see the chinstrap colony right there at the bellows entrance, and then see the fur seals that were on the beach. And like it was like a South Georgia beach on the far side of Whalers Bay, like opposite of the landing site. There were so many fur seals scattered out. I was like, this is exactly what it looks like in South Georgia before the females get here. It was crazy how many fur seals there were there. And there was one golden male there as well, one yellow one, which was nice to be able to show the guests. So towards the end of that landing at Deception, the weather started to pick up. The captain actually kind of like scrapped the end of the landing and was like, let's go. We got to get out of here. And then we worked our way back up the Drake. Not too much, really. The Drake wasn't much to be worried about. We did see Kerguelen petrels in the Drake, which was interesting. It's a seabird that we don't see very often. It's more of like a sub-Antarctic, South Atlantic breeding seabird, and then also over in the Indian Ocean. And I'm like shocked that I even ID'd it. I was up on the bridge and I was like, there's a really weird bird flying around. And I kept looking at the binoculars and I was like, it's not a city shearwater. It's not anything else. And so I was like, what if it's a Kerguelen petrel? And then I like ran down and got my camera and I like told one of the ABs, one of the like sailors on bridge watch, I was like, dude, keep an eye out for this weird bird. And he's a really good spotter. And so when I came back up with my camera, we saw it again, and then it looked like it was like circling the ship. So I just like went to the back of the boat and there was 7 of them back there. And I was like, "What?" Like all the notes in the guidebooks say they don't come to the ship, they don't fly in big groups, and it was 7 different Kerguelen petrels following the ship for like an hour. So that was pretty amazing. Bird nerd moment. So we got back to Ushuaia. We turned over for our last trip of the season, which is a deep south trip, so south of the Antarctic Circle, and we did have scuba divers on board. So no mountaineering, no kayaking, no camping, but we did have to accommodate our operations around scuba diving, which they bring there's their dive guides come on board. And so it really is just more of like a balancing act of like how many zodiacs to allocate for what, and what can the divers do in these different places. So, on the way down, we saw Kerguelen petrels again in the Drake. And generally, we just had like really good bird watching. We had a really great albatross day where we had like 4 or 5 different species. We did briefly see killer whales. There was no chance of like stopping to take a look at them, but they looked like probably type A's. There was at least 2 big males, and no one really got that great of photos of them. But yeah, interesting to see killer whales in the Drake. And the second day in the Drake was so calm. It was amazing. It was not full on Drake Lake, but it was so calm. And there was no fog as we approached the South Shetland Islands, which like never, that's the first time that's ever happened for me this whole season. Every time we've come to the South Shetlands, it's foggy. Every time we leave, the first sea day is foggy. Um, but it was calm, no fog, and there were just fin whales everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. And yeah, what a great way to start the trip. So the first day we go when we get to Antarctica, we go through the Lemaire first light again, and we just start working our way with the intention of working our way south. Another beautiful, glassy, calm Lemaire. There were actually lots of humpbacks in the channel itself, including a whale that was breaching and flipper slapping and stuff, and a mom calf pair. Yeah, it was another incredible Lemaire Channel crossing. So we got south of the Lemaire. We did a fairly similar thing to the trip before. We did zodiac cruising in the iceberg graveyard. The ship wasn't sure it could actually get into Port Charcot, so they dropped us off more like by Plano and Hovegard. And we zodiac cruised back into the Lemaire, which was so cool. And there were whales in there and stuff. And so that was really nice to be able to like have the conditions and have no vessel traffic where we could like be in the Lemaire and play for like a while. And then we also kind of like cruised around the end of Plano. We saw a leopard seal, we saw gentoo penguins, and then we went over for a landing at Port Charcot in the afternoon. The landing at Port Charcot was much better this time around because the conditions were the snow had it like because there had been snowfall since the last time we were there. The walking around conditions were much nicer, so that was good. Lots of really cute gentoo penguins. We did have 2 Adelie penguins, but no chin straps, I think is what it was. And we had nice conditions to hike. People could hike up to the cairn at the top of Port Charcot. People could also go to the magnetic hut. And so there was, all the like human artifacts were exposed because it's so late in the season. And then we went down south from the Lemaire and worked our way more towards like the French Passage. And there was a few seals on ice. There was more humpback whales. And then we made the turn to go offshore to get even further south. And we exited like just north of Vernadsky Station. And in those little islands on the outside of Vernadsky was an incredible amount of humpbacks, like 50 or 60 humpbacks feeding, some of them in groups of like 8 to 10 whales. They were all tucked in all the little island nooks and crannies. So, of course, we couldn't like get in there and watch them or anything, but it was amazing to see in binoculars. So on the second day, we did get far enough south that as the day broke, we were south of the Antarctic Circle, and there was lots of whales. There was lots of seals on ice. We started our day at Detail Island, and it was windy and cold. But there's a historic hut there, and so people got to go see that part of history, and it's like perfectly preserved because well, not perfectly, but it's well preserved and looks like it is lived in because they abandoned the station when they realized they couldn't get provisions to spend the winter. So they were not given a choice of like packing up really anything. They basically just like boarded it up, took their personal stuff and left. They couldn't clean the station out because the captain of the resupply ship was like, if you don't get on this ship now, you're not getting the supplies you need and you're stuck here. So and there are several sites that we visited south of the Antarctic Circle that was the situation. So we did a little bit of zodiac cruising after the landing, but the weather was really not that nice. It was really bouncy. We couldn't really get very far. We saw a few seals, but it just was not good cruising conditions. But what did look good was going through the gullet, which is kind of like the Lemaire Channel south of the Antarctic Circle. Not quite as narrow, but definitely still as tricky of a navigation. And so that was kind of like our only chance to pass through the gullet was that afternoon. And so the captain and expedition leader just made the decision to like get down there. And there were so many whales and seals along the way. It was such a cool cruise. Like some of the icebergs had like 10 fur seals resting on it together, or like 7 crab eater seals laying on it together. And we got some humpback whale IDs, which was also nice. And then we got to the gullet. We were trying to figure out which channel to go down because of how much ice there is. And then just as we're passing like the narrowest, most scenic part, a snow squall catches up with the ship and like totally drops all the visibility. But it did let up. It was very short lived. So we did still get to see like most of the really scenic part of the gullet. But it was just funny where it's like, of course, it's going to just snow right now for this like 5 minutes that we didn't want it to. And as we got south of there, we saw more and more whales. And there was a few minke whales around. And then I was out on deck and I could see whales out in like the thicker area of the brash ice. And I was just like, okay, there's humpbacks, but like something else looks funny, like something about the way the whales are moving and like the water's moving and like the succession of the blows. I was like, something's off. And finally, I realized it was killer whales mixed with the humpbacks, and they were all head on towards the ship. So I like ran upstairs to the bridge. I'm out of breath. I'm like, there's killer whales. And the captain's like, just before I can even do anything else, he just like takes the throttle off down to 0 almost. And it's not really a good opportunity to like spin around in there and like go follow them. But we did get people out on deck, and like they had quite an interaction with the humpbacks where they had the humpbacks like porpoising out of the water, getting their heads up and getting all fired up. And we think they were probably large type bees. But it was really hard to tell. Like when you read the guidebooks, even like the updated ones, it literally says like they look exactly the same, the 2 type bees, except one's bigger. And like they do both eat marine mammals. So like I mean, yeah, the small type bees mostly eat penguins, but they will eat seals. So like it's not helpful. It's like I don't know, like they look bigger, I guess. Like trying to tell from the ship while they're moving. So we said they were probably large type bees because of how far south we were and the fact that they had the humpbacks all fired up, but like who knows? So then the third day, since we were south of the gullet, we did a zodiac cruise in the morning at this place called Pourquoi Pas, which is named after the Charcot expedition. Pourquoi pas is a phrase in French. I think it means like why not? And we had all the zodiacs on the water, and we didn't have guests yet. And there was a call from the bridge saying they spotted killer whales and they were coming out towards the ship. So we were like, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, like trying to get the guests on board. And then we went and chased them down. I mean, that's a bad way to say it, but we went and caught up with them. And it looked again like probably large type bees, and it's hard to say if it was the same group or not. I tried to take as many ID photos as possible, but both encounters, like from the ship, it was too quick, and from the Zodiac, it was too bouncy, and so I don't have great comparison photos to know if it's the same group or not. Luckily, they were swimming downwind, so we could at least get nice views of them, but I was trying to like shoot one-handed and drive, because I'm like trying to manage the steering downwind. I'm not like I don't like driving with my leg with the tiller. It's just like not a good idea. And so my photos are terrible, but that was the first time I've ever seen killer whales in Antarctica from the Zodiac. And so that was a really nice encounter. But and then on the way back we had to backtrack into the wind, but there was lots of little like coves to explore and little small islands and icebergs, and so we kind of like hid from the wind to get as far back to the ship without getting wet as we could. We had Adelie penguins, fur seals. There was a Weddell seal that looked like it had just been weaned, and so that was cool to see. And then in the afternoon, we went down to this place called Horseshoe Island, and the weather mellowed out and the wind dropped off, and it was a really nice cruise down to Horseshoe Island. Just before we got there, I thought I saw 2 blue whales. But they were being really squirrely and I didn't get good looks at them or good photos. They did surface close to the ship. I was on the opposite side when it first happened. And then the second time they came up when they were a little bit behind us, I was like, oh, shoot, these are probably blue whales. But we couldn't, there was no way to turn around. Um, it was an absolutely beautiful afternoon at Horseshoe. Really glassy, flat, calm seas, like really nice light. We had a good chance for people to do like a little bit of like scramble up to the top of the rocks there, get a nice overlook of the channel where the ship was, and there was some really cool rock formations there at Horseshoe Island itself. The geology was pretty cool. There were some fur seals around. Some of them were quite feisty and took quite a long time to settle down during the landing, but they did finally settle after like 2.5 hours. And we had a little group of recently fledged Adelie penguins come run around on shore, and they were being super cute. There's another historic hut there at Horseshoe Island. Same story. They abandoned it because they couldn't get reprovisioned for the winter. But it was cool to be able to walk around. That landing, I also wore my penguin suit on shore. And so I signed the guest book and said that I was there in a penguin suit, which is kind of funny. So if you ever go to Horseshoe Island, look for my entry from that March 2024. And then the next day we went down to Stonington Island, and it was super beautiful sunrise. We knew the weather was not going to be good. It was calling, the forecast basically just looked like extreme katabatic winds. Katabatic winds are driven by basically the temperature at the top of mountains and glaciers becomes really heavy because it's so cold, and it just accelerates with gravity and the pressure difference downhill very quickly, and has the ability to blow like hurricane force winds down off the glaciers and off the mountains. And so it does, like, it's the kind of wind that like takes a breath. So it'll like crank really hard and then it'll stop. Then it'll crank really hard again and then it'll stop. You never know when it's going to turn on and off, but it does turn on and off. So in the morning when we first got there, it was off and it was calm and it was amazing sunrise, and it was like sea ice was just starting to form, and we were pushing it around with the Zodiacs. Um, and then we landed and it started to turn on. And so we like told all the guests they had to leave their life jackets on in case we had to evacuate quickly. And we did get the landing in where everybody could go see all of the huts that were there, which is good because there was a few gentlemen on the boat on that trip who booked it to go see Stonington particularly because their dad lived and worked there. And so they wanted to see where he had lived and worked when he was young. And so they did get to see that, and it was really nice to be able to make that happen for those guys. And they gave like a little presentation about it at some point during the trip too, which was kind of cool. There's not a lot of wildlife there, but we did see a few penguins and skuas and things like that. But then the weather really started to pick up, and so we had to get out of there. In the afternoon, the weather was so relentless that we just started heading north. We were like, we don't need to screw around any further south than this. Stonington was kind of like our furthest south point, and we were like, okay, let's work our way back up. Throughout the afternoon, we experienced winds up to 70 knots as we worked our way back towards the north. We did still see whales, but like you weren't allowed outside on deck because the wind was blowing so hard, and the ship was keeled over, like leaning over pretty hard as well as it cruised up when the winds were coming on the side. So yeah, definitely intense Antarctica weather. The next day we were at this place called the Fish Islands, and just generally kind of cruising around in Crystal Sound. We found a nice place to cruise in the morning where we could do a quick little continental landing just to make sure we got that checked off the list for people, because they're always worried about saying they set foot on the continent, not just an island. It's all islands, unless you believe ice is a rock. If you believe ice is a rock, then there's plenty of landings that are continental landings. Anyways, I digress. We had some nice humpback whales during our Zodiac cruise that were a little bit curious and friendly with the Zodiacs. And even when we passed them off to different Zodiacs, they were still kind of curious and tolerated the boats really well, and had some close encounters with them, which was really nice. The guests really enjoyed it. Of course, I always really enjoy it as well. Um, and then in the afternoon, we kind of just like cruised up Crystal Sound without a whole plan. And we're like, when we find a place that we think is going to be nice to cruise, we'll just stop the ship and cruise. And that's what we did. And so we did end up going through like these little islands. There wasn't a ton of like really cool ice to look at. There was a little bit of big icebergs, but mostly just kind of cruising around these little islands. There was a Adelie penguin colony. There was a leopard seal that really didn't want to be watched. There were lots of Weddell seals and quite a few crab eater seals. There was an iceberg that had like a big foot, like a big plateau at the surface because it kind of tipped. And there were crab eater seals like swimming around in the pool on the foot and then hauled out on the ice there. And then towards the end of the cruise, the assistant expedition leader said he saw humpbacks by the ship. So we all turned and went back towards the ship. But the humpbacks didn't stay. And so we didn't end up seeing them. But I went out. I just kept going because my people were not cold yet. And we went out and I was like, well, let's go look at this big iceberg and see if maybe we find the whale out there. We didn't find the whale, but we did find like 5 crab eater seals swimming together, trying to find a place to haul out for the evening on this piece of ice. And so it was pretty interesting to watch. And then we went back to the ship because everybody was kind of like, like there's only a couple zodiacs out. Like we should all just wrap up. And I was like, do we have to? Like, it's not my fault that other people gave up and like went in early, but it was like, okay, fine. I gave in to peer pressure and we like all got back on the ship. Well, they were hurrying us up because they had seen killer whales from the bridge. And I was like, are you telling me that if I would have stayed out for another 10 minutes, I'd be looking at killer whales in the Zodiac again? And they were like, yes, but everybody else was already put away. And I was like, fine. But it was a huge group of type A's, like 15 or more. And I think it was like at least 4 different males. And we got really nice looks at them from the ship. So that was super cool to see. And so killer whales south of the Antarctic Circle. Um, Again, the third sighting. So then that night we went north. We went north of the Circle. We went north of the Lemaire. We ended up in Nico Harbor. I like Nico Harbor, even if we don't land there. It's a beautiful place to Zodiac cruise. And we did kind of a split landing because Nico is also kind of a small site. There's no reason to put everybody on there at the same time if you don't have to. And there were lots of humpbacks around right by the ship, right where we set up to drift and run the landing. And there were some whales that were a little curious about the zodiacs, other whales that were getting really like playful with each other. And then we pushed out into the sea ice, which was, it looked thick. And then I started pushing in it with the zodiac, and it was actually pretty easy to move through. And we found one humpback that was like, we could hear it breathing. And then finally we got close enough that we could see it like bobbing up and down in this really thick brash ice. And then it just started playing with the ice, which was really interesting to watch it kind of like swish it around and like would lay with its flipper out, and then it picked up a few pieces on its rostrum and was rolling around. And then when I passed that whale off to some other zodiacs, I went to another one. It did the same thing. And of course, like when it picked up the piece of ice the best, I'm just like, I have my camera in my hand and I'm just standing there staring. I didn't take any pictures. But it was cool to see. I have a few photos where you can like see clearly that there's ice all over the whale's body, but you can't tell that it like intentionally picked it up out of the water. And then on shore, the landing site was, it was okay because it had been snowing. Um, but it still wasn't like super great snow conditions for the end of the season. But there were young elephant seals at the landing site, which was interesting to see. Like you don't see them on snow very often. You also just don't see them on the peninsula very often. But there was 3 young elephant seals, all males, and they were taking turns jousting with each other and chasing each other around on the snow. And because it is a little bit of a layer of fresh snow, they like could slide pretty far on their bellies. So that was pretty nice to see. And then in the afternoon that day, we went to Cooverville again. And it was kind of the same as always. But there was a very feisty and annoying fur seal. Like multiple guides and a guest who had a walking stick had to like brush it on the whiskers to get it away from people because it just kept wanting to chase everybody. Like we had to really manage this fur seal for most of the landing. And a couple times he like chased us for like 60 yards or more as we were trying to just like walk around. And then the Gentoo penguin chicks were just like running around everywhere, running through our gear. You know, at one point I had to like pick up a life jacket and kind of like coax it off of the tarp and like get it out of the gear. Um, and then we did a Zodiac cruise there. We always do a split landing there. And there were leopard seals around was kind of the main highlight of the show. There was one that was kind of curious and like into it with the Zodiacs for a few minutes. And then there were some whales out by the ship, but the wind was picking up out in the Gerlache. And so it was just a windy and wet ride to try and get out and see them. We did get some looks at them, but like not super great. But I mean, they saw so many whales this trip that it was like, it didn't really matter. The next day we went to Foyne Harbor again. Again, plenty of whales. There was a curious mom and calf pair. Like the calf really wanted to be with the Zodiac, and the mom was kind of like, you're gonna stay over here. But eventually she did kind of calm down and like acclimate, and she and the calf both came over and looked at the Zodiacs a little bit. And it was pretty nice encounter. A little bit windy and bouncy, but really nice sunny morning. And then it glassed off for the afternoon. We went across the Gerlache over to this island called Tuhummock and landed at Palaver Point. It was so beautiful. It was sunny. We were all down in like our base layers. The snow conditions were actually really good. And it was a really nice landing. We had chinstrap penguins. We had mellow fur seals, which was nice. And the whole cruise between Foyne and Tuhummock, there were just tons of humpbacks. We could see humpbacks from the landing site, and the guests had a really nice, like probably one of the nicest of the season polar plunges. It was actually warm and sunny for their polar plunge and not windy. So really, really incredible. Kind of like the day at Brown Bluff when I talked about my trips on Plancius at the beginning of the season. And then absolutely stunning, amazing sunset on our way out towards the Brandfield Strait, leaving from Tuhummock, going towards the South Shetland Islands. We came across a really big group of social humpback whales that were spy hopping and rolling around, and there were just whale body parts everywhere, and the sky was pink, and it was just magical. Like perfect last night for me of the whole season on the Antarctic Peninsula. Perfect like send off from Antarctica. And then the next day we did finish up out at Deception Island. It was windy and snowy. The captain only let us have a half day there. So we landed at Whalers Bay only. We did offer cruises through Neptune's Bellows. We didn't even go all the way out of the Bellows. It was so choppy. But we did get to like see the big cliffs and go over and look at the shipwreck and and see the fur seals and all of that. And so it worked out okay, but it was cold and splashy and windy. And then we headed north in the Drake that afternoon. And it was not nice. And yeah, that was the toughest, I think, part of the Drake crossing was that afternoon and then the next day. And then it kind of backed off as we got closer to South America, but we were like running between two big storm systems. Like another like 70 plus knot storm system was off of South America that we were trying to get ahead of. And yeah, it was a, reminder that you don't want to be here in the wintertime. And at one point, I think it was that first afternoon, if not, it was the second day. We did see southern bottlenose whales from the bridge. It was like me, the captain, the sailor, and one guest. And they surfaced like right in front of the ship, and then we watched them surface like 4 times down the side of the ship, and it was so windy that we weren't allowed outside, and so I didn't even have my camera with me because I was like, I'm not going to shoot photos out of the bridge window. So I have no photos, but I did see southern bottlenose whales, so that was pretty awesome. And that is finally a wrap on the Antarctic season. Ocean season, Southern Hemisphere season, whatever you want to say it is. So hopefully you guys enjoyed those trip reports and kind of the little facts sprinkled in along the way. We're going to get some guests back on the podcast here coming up next. So you won't just hear my voice droning on and on and on about things I've been seeing. I mean, I swear if you have to hear one more Gen 2 penguin story, some of you might stop listening. But yeah, thanks so much for listening to all my trip reports from Antarctica. It was definitely a huge learning experience. It was something that I never, like, if you would have told 16 or even 18-year-old Katlyn that she was going to work 5.5 months in the Southern Hemisphere going back and forth to these places, like, she would have never believed you. So I'm definitely like super grateful that I was able to work down here this season. It was not my plan A or B, but life happens. Things are looking up in Maui, at least a little bit more settled and a little bit more planned. It's gonna be a long road to recover. I don't know when I'm gonna be able to be back there for whale season. But I am happy to see some progress, and I am happy to see that locals are not giving up the fight with the government to get Lahaina the way they want it when they rebuild. Families are still leaving the island. People still are struggling with housing solutions. So definitely be a super mindful traveler if you're going to go there. But they do need the business, for better or worse. So if you do go, like, try and support as best you can the local community, do some service while you're there, and just be really mindful of what has happened there, because it's definitely going to leave a scar on the island, probably forever. But definitely the next 5 years is going to be like, you're going to see it. You're going to see the pain. You're going to see the marks on the land, and like, yeah, I'm stoked to go back there someday, but it's yeah, it's gonna be a tough one. So who knows what I'm gonna do next winter? Maybe it'll be Antarctica again. Maybe I will get there for whale season. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye.